How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege. Today is Monday, December the 9th, almost through the entirety of Week 14, and we had another great round of games yesterday to talk about on today's show. We're going to get into the Rams game, of course, with the Buffalo Bills, the highest scoring game of 2024. Of course, we're going to get to Sunday Night Football, where the Chiefs escaped with another narrow victory, as well as talking about Monday Night Football tonight and the Philadelphia Eagles game as well. A lot to dissect on today's show, so we're going to get into it. Of course, not without, though, reminding you guys, if you guys want to get involved with anything during the show, whether it be any question you may have, a comment you want to make, or just any opinion you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight always adds a lot to the conversation, and we thrive on your energy and insights, of course. So please don't think twice about getting involved with the show. And if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. I can see it, and that way I can air it out and talk about it, say it out loud, and we could bring the conversation elsewhere through that and, just add more to the topics or bring up any new topics that you guys might want to add. So again, if you want to get involved with the show, use the Super Chat button and get involved, share what's on your mind, and again, don't be afraid to do so. It's always a great way to get more interaction from you guys, and it's always just adds on to the conversation anyway. So use the new Super Chat feature, get involved that way, and let us know what's on your mind. So with that being the case, now we can start talking about the action from last night before we get into the Rams and Bills game, because that one definitely stole a lot of the headlines. We got to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, and much like all their games have gone this year, through the usual drama-filled 60 minutes, it all came down to one final game-winning kick like they usually do, and the Chiefs won. It hit off of the top upright and went in. The Chiefs won last night 19-17, and the phrase that continues to get said with the Kansas City Chiefs and related to them is that they always find a way. I feel like whenever an organization, any team, any dynasty can get to that point where people just can't explain how they win these games and they just decide to say they just find a way. You think of the Chiefs, obviously, the Patriots, the Celtics now also is another one, the Dodgers, of course, in some defining moments, right, where you think they're out of it, they just always find a way, right? When people just have no explanation, they just have to say that. I think you've reached pretty much the pinnacle of the competition of the sport when people can't even explain how you're winning these games. But there's always something about them, right? There's always something about the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, that gets them through these victories. The Kansas City Chiefs, with the victory last night, won their 9th straight AFC West title with a 19-17 win over the Chargers. Now the Chiefs sit at 12-1 on the year, getting closer to securing the number 1 seed, especially with the Bills' loss yesterday to the Rams that we're going to get to in the next segment. But also on this game, despite missing crucial pieces on offense, the Chargers did almost everything right in last night's game, but the loss, unfortunately, brings them to 8-5 and back down to the 6th seed after, their loss. The Baltimore Ravens didn't play, but just by default, they have a better record. So they move back up to the 5th seed, and the Chargers go down to number 6. But more on this game, on the Chiefs and, just finding a way to win, right? The 2-point victory made it a record 15th straight one-score victories for the Kansas City Chiefs. Going back to last year, that's an NFL record, and, I think just this game alone, or this season, they're 10-0 in one-score games, and that prompts the question, right? Could you imagine what they would be if a couple or most of these one-score games didn't go their way, what their record would be? I mean, we could speculate and overanalyze it, but the fact is that it's not that way, right? They've won all of them for a good reason, right? And, I think they're a deserved 12-1, because if you could do it constantly, if you haven't lost and you've gone through it 10 times, at what point are we going to stop calling it lucky? You know what I mean? Like, if you do it maybe 3 times, 4 times, or something like that, but they've done it double-digit times, there's got to be like a limit, right, where you can just stop calling it luck. But again, it goes back to, the reason that everybody gives, right? They just find a way. People don't want to admit that the Chiefs are, just this good, I guess, but it's hard to argue with a 12-1 record and just always finding a way to win these one-score games. But it definitely didn't come without any struggle, because once again, Patrick Mahomes was sacked and was under duress. For most of the night, he was sacked 3 times. He has been sacked 13 times over the last 3 games, which is the most in any 3-game stretch of his career. And he was also hit 13 times last night as well. So that's obviously the biggest concern, right? You keep winning these games, but also, like, there comes a point in time where we have to stop calling it luck. There has to come a point in time where the Chiefs have to stop allowing so many hits on Patrick, because you don't want to you don't want to like put it out there, but taking so many hits, the season is long. They're in it for the long term. So you need Patrick as healthy as possible. You can't bring him into the playoffs all battered and bruised. So that is something that still remains the biggest concern, even though, again, they keep getting these victories. And, Patrick had a decent day, 210 yards and a touchdown. Isaiah Pacheco is slowly getting back into the groove of things, 55 rushing yards for him on 14 carries. And Travis Kelce led all receivers with 45 receiving yards, and DeAndre Hopkins was the only guy that scored a touchdown in last night's game. It was a touchdown followed up by a lot of field goals. So that's what the story was for the Kansas City Chiefs. But on the other side, Justin Herbert did pretty much all that he could physically and, just as the leader of this team to try and win this game. It's kind of hard to pinpoint things that they did wrong, because, other than starting slow and, getting off to a pretty rough start, everything else pretty much went as they would have liked to. But, in the end, their defense would have liked to get the Chiefs off the field, obviously, right? But he finished with 213 yards. Gus Edwards scored one of 2 touchdowns that the Chargers had. He scored a rushing touchdown, and the receiving touchdown went to Darius Davis as well. Or actually, no, went to, my mistake, Quentin Johnson in the second half. So Joshua Palmer also led all receivers with 78 receiving yards. But in the end, again, the Chiefs found a way to get it out of this game just by winning by 2 points. And really, if you look at how this game kind of broke down, the Chiefs, led at first 3-0 through a field goal, but then the game kind of stalled out a little bit. There was 5 punts combined by both of them until the Chiefs tacked on another field goal, and still it was 6-0. And Kansas City was the only one to score in the first half, right? Because they were up 6-0, and then right before halftime they went up 13-0 through that one touchdown, like I said. So already, it's not great. We mentioned that slow start by the Chargers, but it's not out of reach, definitely. So there's still an opening there. And the Chargers took full advantage of that optimism in the second half when they finally got on the board through a touchdown. Now they cut the lead in half pretty much, 13-7. Then they forced Kansas City to punt, and the Chargers right away scored again, and they took the lead 14-13. So now a completely different game, right? It's changed the whole dynamic of this game with how the Chargers approached the second half and how hot they got started in the second half as well. Then, after both teams exchanged the field goal, the Chargers still led 16-17, but like we talked about before, the Kansas City Chiefs did a phenomenal job of holding the ball for the last, I want to say, like 4 minutes of this game to shut the door completely on the Chargers by putting together a 14-play, 47-yard drive to ultimately kick the game-winning field goal in the end, right? During that drive, Mahomes did the typical Mahomes things. He had a pass in there that he kind of jumped up in the air and threw it for a first down to Xavier Worthy. He extended the play a couple times, the most crucial one coming to Travis Kelce that got them that crucial first down, like I said there, in the red zone. And, the the criticism on top of just the fact that Patrick gets hit a lot is the fact that, those explosive plays where Mahomes just chucks it like 50 yards down the field, Kelsey gets wide open down the middle of the field as well, aren't there. But I think the biggest virtue that the Chiefs bring is the fact that they're able to just be so adaptive and just shapeshift into whatever is needed for whatever circumstance, whatever season. And this season, they've had to put together, methodical drives, right? They don't make a fuss about it. They don't talk to the media or say like, oh yeah, we're just not ourselves. We got to find ourselves. They just say, all right, we're not getting explosive plays. We'll just go the long way, and we're going to do it methodically. They lead the NFL in 10-plus play drives thus far, and it's gotten them this far, and I think that's a credit to them, a credit to how they're able, to, again, be so adaptive to their personnel and what the game requires, which makes them, I think, just at a different level than everybody else. Forever Eagles, crazy people think Chiefs, they're overrated. They go on a cruise into, it's hard because, you look at the close games and then you look at them as the number one seed. The only game they lost this year was in Buffalo. So you'd think if maybe somebody would have snuck in and, taken the number one seed from them, it would have been, a way to kind of expose them, right? But they're just going to probably win the rest of these games, if not maybe lose one. But I think the Bills really had an opportunity to go by losing to the Rams. Not an easy game, but still, they really looked like they had the best chance to kind of take that number one seed from them. And it sucks for everybody else that the playoffs are going to go through Arrowhead because, they win all these close games. But now that they're at home, they have the crowd on their side and everything. It makes it, just like so demoralizing, right? Like, do we have to go into Arrowhead and try to beat this team that doesn't lose close games, right? It's going to be tough, but it was always going to be tough, right? You were always going to have to beat Mahomes, and it's no different this year. But we mentioned the Buffalo Bills in there, and we're going to get to their game because their game was not like this game. Their game put up a lot more points than this Chiefs and Chargers game. This Rams game with the Buffalo Bills was arguably the best one of the year. So we're going to get into it, break it down, talk about the Bills' run defense, the Rams' offense and how explosive it was, and the number one seed as well in regards to the Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. That is coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the show here, guys, to talk about one of the most entertaining games that we saw arguably all year. It's been back-to-back weeks now, right? If you go back to last week and the Steelers and Bengals game last week, where they set the record for the most points in, this season, I guess the present season record. They put up 82 points last week, and now this week, the Rams and the Buffalo Bills game, surpassed that. They put up 86 points yesterday in a 44-42 victory for the Los Angeles Rams in a narrow, nail-biting game that had offense coming out of everywhere, right? We saw the special team score a touchdown, Puka Nacua going crazy, Josh Allen arguably playing better than all of the guys that I just mentioned. It was nuts just watching it live and just, being glued to your seat watching I think the highest level and the epitome of offense was shown yesterday. And I don't even think I'm overhyping it, honestly, because with that victory, the Rams are now 7-6. They're 8th in the playoff race now, and they're only one game behind of Washington for that last wild card spot, and they're still in the race for that division, right? I keep saying that for the Rams and the NFC West, it always feels like there's only going to be one team to make the playoffs from that division, and it's going to be whoever wins that division. And I think the Cardinals have kind of, been left in the dust, being swept by the Seahawks. The Seahawks have still yet to play the 49ers. They split with the 49ers. They swept the Cardinals. They have one more game left with the Rams. And the Seahawks have not been swept, obviously, where the 49ers have a losing record in their division. The Cardinals, like I mentioned, have just been swept. And I think it's just coming down to the Rams and Seahawks. So that game coming up is going to be such a entertaining game to watch because there's going to be so much on the line, obviously, right, for these playoff reasons. So that's what happened on the Rams side, right? What good came from this victory, a huge victory, again, over the Bills, not just for all those reasons, but because you get the moral victory, right, of beating the Bills, one of the best teams in the NFL. You put up this amount of points on them. Of course, they also scored a lot of points on you, but you were able to outlast them, which I think just makes it even more exciting. But also along those lines, it's hard to say that it was a bad loss for the Bills, right? Because it feels worse because you look at the circumstances, right? It's crushing because it breaks a 7-game winning streak, but more importantly, it drops them to 10-3, and now they're 2 games back of the Chiefs for that number 1 seed. And the AFC East was always, in their hands, even if I didn't believe it, and I openly admit that. I didn't think they were going to be good, but it was always in their hands right out of the gate. Probably around week 5, you kind of felt that the Bills were pretty legit this year, and if the Dolphins or the Jets didn't really step up, they were going to run away with it, and that's exactly what happened. So that was always going to be the first goal, right? All the teams say that, but to be in a position after beating the 49ers, I would say, and, locking up the division, you're feeling good. You're feeling great. You already beat the Chiefs, who are 1 game ahead of you, but unfortunately you lose this game, and now it's looking a little bit tougher, especially with next week's game being against the Lions, that the Bills ultimately, end up getting that number 1 seed. It's kind of hard to see that play out. But also for Buffalo, what else can you say about Josh, right? We thought we saw his MVP performance against the 49ers, but little did we know, I have it up here for you guys, little did we know we were going to get this from one guy carrying his team to the utmost, level of what that phrase actually means, right? Josh Allen, total combined between rushing and passing yards, accounted for 424 total yards and 6 touchdowns just himself. All of that, that's crazy. The amount of offense he produced for his team is all up there for you guys to see, and it is crushing because you still lost, right? It's not like he did this in a win, but it's just unbelievable what he's doing. The first player in NFL history with 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns in a single game as well. And on the other side of things also, just overall, the Rams needed all the offense they obviously produced, and they even blocked a punt on top of that to defeat Buffalo and really defeat Josh Allen because he was on another level yesterday. And the Rams definitely needed all 44 points that they put up, the contribution from their special teams to get away with a 2-point victory in the end. But, you want to talk about offense, right? Josh Allen clearly stole the show, but he wasn't the only one to put up big numbers. Josh Allen was one on the Bills side. Khalil Shakir had a nice day. 5 receptions, 106 yards, and a touchdown. Amari Cooper, 6 receptions, 95 yards. And Matt Collins and Ty Johnson also scored some receiving touchdowns. Then, on the other side of things, you had to match it somehow if you were the Rams. And Matthew Stafford didn't fall too far behind. He had 320 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He, of course, isn't going to give you the rushing output that Josh Allen does, but the Rams got plenty of that from Kyren Williams with 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. Blake Corum looked pretty decent in the snaps that he got, and they totaled 137 rushing yards on the day through 3 guys, right? But then on the receiving end of things for the Chargers, it was all about Puka Nacua. 12 receptions, 162 yards for Puka, and a touchdown. Just completely, there was no answer for Puka yesterday. There was no answer. The zone wasn't working. They tried to blitz Matthew Stafford and get the ball out quickly, but he was getting the ball out even quicker than they were even getting to him. And Puka was beating man coverage. He was finding the spots in zone coverage. There was nothing really that the Bills defense, could have provided as an answer for Puka. It was complete dominance from him. Cooper Kupp also scored a touchdown, 92 yards as well, to the Rams' efforts. But, this game, I can't go through every single thing that happened because we'd be here for probably like 10 minutes trying to go through everything that happened. But at one point, the Rams had a 24-14 lead actually going into halftime, which in the first half included 4 touchdowns on offense, 1 field goal, 1 punt, and 1 blocked punt return, return for a touchdown. All of that happened in the first half. And for a lot of the games we've seen this year, that's probably a game's worth of things that happened in some of these games. But that was only the first half. They only punted 1 time in the first half, which was nuts. And the second half really was no different, right? You had 7 touchdowns on offense in the second half and only 3 punts. 2, really. The last one doesn't really count because, it just ended the game. So, really, you had 2 punts and 7 touchdowns on offense in the second half, which I guess just toppled the first half. And the level we saw in the first half was definitely outdone from what we saw in the second half. And it really got interesting when at one point in the second half, the Rams were up by 3 points, 38-35, with under 4 minutes to go. And instead of settling for a field goal, right, where they were facing a 4th down, and, there was, not little time left, but there was little enough time left where you're thinking, all right, can our defense do something here? There's not really too much time left, so is a field goal really going to make the difference? The answer is always no when you're playing Josh Allen, Patrick, Lamar, any of those guys, Joe Burrow, any of those guys, right? If you go up by 6 points and you give the ball back to them, especially the way Josh was playing in this game, right? We didn't get the final stat sheet, right, until obviously the end of the game. But the way he was just dicing up your defense, there was no way you give the ball back to him with 3 or over 2 minutes left in this game. It's just not going to happen. So they went for it. They went for it. Instead of settling for a field goal, they got the 4th down conversion. Not only did they get it, trying to put more points up, but the most important thing was they were able to chew off a lot more of that clock, and ultimately they ended up scoring a touchdown on that when Puka Nacua took that screen pass to the house, and now they built up a pretty decent lead again over the Bills. But the Bills on their following drive, they got to the goal line with about 1 minute and 6 seconds left, 3 timeouts at this point. So a lot of people are thinking they're going to punch it in. They're going to have 3 timeouts. They're going to kick it off regular, and they're going to have an opportunity at least. But they ran a quarterback sneak that didn't happen. So they used the timeout at that point in time. And then they did score on the next play, but you really would have liked to have kept all 3 timeouts. And now instead of trying, a regular kick, you had to try the onside kick, which almost never works. And from that point on, the Rams kill the remaining time on the clock. And on that play, on that decision to go for a quarterback sneak, I know, I actually don't know what the analytics would say, but in that situation, I know Josh Allen gets that to go about 98, 99% of the time, but I feel like you have to know, again, 98% of the time Josh gets it, but there's still that 1 or 0.5% chance that you don't get it. And to me, in those situations where you literally have to be so perfect to mount any sort of comeback like that, you have to eliminate all chances. If there's 0.1, if there's half, if there's 1% chance, that's enough for me. You have to eliminate all other chances of things going wrong. Like we just talked about, the Rams eliminating all of the Bills' possibilities to try and come back in this game. They went for it on 4th down, right? Because if you kick a field goal, relating it back to that situation, there's still that chance, right, that they can score a touchdown, right? There's no guarantee that your defense now stops them. With the idea to try to eliminate all possibilities of the other team, coming back on you, you go for it on fourth down. And in this situation, I think with the idea of QB sneak it and how certain it looks, it's not 100% guaranteed that he gets it. And obviously, he didn't. And you have to know that the downside of that, the things that happen when you don't get it are much worse. Obviously, the risk isn't worth the reward in that situation. Again, all but guaranteed on how it looks. It's not a for sure thing to happen. And I would have opted for passing it because, you could argue that, if you pass it, it could get intercepted or it could be incomplete anyway. There's no way you 100% get it, which is true. But the difference is that one stops the clock on their own and the other one keeps the clock running, right? If you pass it and you don't get it, the clock's not moving, so you don't have to waste a timeout, and then you can QB sneak it if you want. So I think trying to run there and knowing that you could not get it, I think was a pretty, decently sized mistake by Sean McDermott in that part. But, something else to just mention here about the Bills is that the running defense seems to be a bit of a problem because in all of their losses, not only have they been on the road, which is a little concerning, knowing that you could be on the road for arguably the biggest game this year, if you make it that far, is that they've allowed 137 rushing yards yesterday. They allowed 271 to the Ravens, and 94 to Houston without Joe Mixon. So that could have been even worse. But that's all of the losses the Bills have had, and it's been the same pattern in each one. So it's obviously a problem not being able to stop the run, but I think the defensive backs in man-to-man coverage are not very good. There's not one guy that you think, he's about to shut down this receiver, right? You look at other guys, you maybe think of Marlon Humphrey, Trent McDuffie, I'm trying to think of who else. There might not be a lot of guys. Pat Surtain with the Denver Broncos. You don't have one of those guys. So the Bills predominantly run a lot of zone. But when you have an offensive mind like Sean McVay and the weapons that they have, they destroyed that zone yesterday. So you're already feeling uncomfortable in man-to-man. So you're trying to send in a lot more people to try and get the Matthew Stafford. And, in one-on-one coverage, you think you'd like your chances, but you have man beaters on the other side, right? Cooper Kupp in one-on-one, he's getting that 8-9%, he's getting it 8 or 9 out of 10 times in that situation. Same thing with Puka, and we saw yesterday, right? Puka and man, Puka and zone, everything was working for them. So it was going to be a shootout, and Josh, thank God for Josh, right? Being able to answer, but it's a tough situation with the Bills defense. I don't think they're awful or anything like that, but it is something to just keep an eye on, right? In these games where they might lose, and they haven't lost a lot, right? But you try to eliminate those possibilities and where you can improve, and I think that's one where right out of the gate you knew the kind of runs that Kyron was pulling out, that they were going to have success running it. And also, you can get even deeper into it, talking about the run success, then the play action, and it opens up even more that way. But yeah, the Bills are still obviously a good team, but this game, definitely hurt more for the Bills, obviously, because it feels like they let an opportunity slip by to try and catch the Chiefs in this game. So, it is what it is now. More likely than not, they're going to have the 2 seed and still host a couple playoff games before, like it looks like, ultimately going up to Arrowhead. But speaking about a fellow number 2 seed, the Philadelphia Eagles also played yesterday, and even though they got the win, a lot of people are not happy about it. How could you be upset after a win, getting your 9th win in a row? We're going to talk about it. Why were the Eagles so upset, and whether or not we should worry, just like they are, it seems, after yesterday's victory. We're going to touch on that coming up next.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast today, here still on December the 9th, obviously, and we're going to get into looking at the Eagles and Carolina Panthers game. To be quite honest, I didn't think I would be talking about this game back on like Friday or Thursday when we predicted it. I said that, the Eagles, I talked about how the Carolina Panthers were playing better, how it was encouraging, but, we're talking about the Eagles here. And little did I know that the Eagles and Carolina Panthers game and the ending of it was all arguably one of the most entertaining endings to one of these games. You had this one, obviously the Rams game in the later window, but the Dolphins game went into overtime. This one was, in there with being one of the most entertaining ones because the Eagles were 12.5-point favorites going into this game, but barely made it through for their 9th win in a row to ultimately win 22-16. But the fact that the Eagles improved to 11-2 and the Panthers fall to 3-10, there was really no expectations for the Panthers in this game, but to have a chance to win like that, I think does mean a lot to them. And it also, created a lot of frustration for the Eagles because more importantly, the Eagles were able to do a lot of good things, right? But even still, there seemed to be like some tension in the atmosphere around the Eagles after the game. But in this game, in this victory, the Eagles were able to clinch a playoff spot because of the fact that they won. Detroit won, and also we saw the Cardinals and the Falcons lose. All of that happened, so the Eagles, based on all those results, ended up making and clinching a playoff spot. And on top of that, Nick Sirianni has made the playoffs in each of his 4 seasons there as the head coach, making this the 4th straight year that the Eagles have made the playoffs. They haven't had a run like that since the beginning of this century, from 2000 to 2004. So, I mean, it is kind of interesting, that point, just because, Sirianni, from where we started this season and people not being happy with him and his antics or his decisions or anything like that, I mean, they're 11-2 now. And they make the playoffs, and they have a super talented team. So, to kind of hold off and just peel off Sirianni a little bit, maybe not throw so much heat his way, right? Because, at the end of the day, he's getting results. So it's a lot better than, sweating out and trying to make the playoffs, right, at the other end of things. So Sirianni has been doing his job, and he's been doing it his way, which I think doesn't get talked about enough. So that was pretty noteworthy in the end. But in large part, we can talk about Sirianni, we can talk about the playmakers that they have, obviously, everywhere, but it starts and begins, I think, or it starts and ends with Saquon Barkley. Yesterday, another historic, just ridiculous performance from him. He set a new Eagles franchise record in rushing yards for a single season, surpassing LaShawn McCoy's record back in 2013 with 1,607 yards by LaShawn McCoy. Saquon Barkley broke that, and now he stands at 1,623 with a handful of games still remaining. So that's going to build up a lot more. He has Eric Dickerson's rushing record in his sights, and it looks like, based on the projections and everything like that, he could get it. So that is something to keep an eye on, obviously, outside of the wins and losses. But it was a great game overall by Saquon, but that was really where the good vibes really ended with this Eagles team, because the passing game was not really there, unlike the other games, right? Because we talk about the slow starts and everything like that, but they ultimately find a way to connect everything. Saquon gets going, then A.J. Brown gets involved, and at one point, everything is working for them. The offensive line is moving people. The Don't really know how they got there, but, every single game it feels like the Eagles start slow, and then they just start, this snowball effect starts coming at you, and you don't really know how to stop it. But the fact that the passing game was lacking, I think, really opened up the door here for the Panthers to make this a game. Even though they didn't win, they definitely scared a few people the way that this game was going. And in terms of the passing game, you look at Jalen Hurts, he only finished with 108 yards passing on the day. He had 2 passing touchdowns, though, and he also added 59 rushing yards to Saquon's 124. The receiving touchdowns went to Devontae Smith and Grant Calcaterra, stepping up for Dallas Goedert, who ended up being on the injured reserve for the foreseeable future. And A.J. Brown only led all receivers with 43 receiving yards. Then it was Devontae Smith with 37. Not really the outing you'd expect from 2 of the most talented guys and one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. But, that's what it was, and that's what kind of sparked some frustration afterwards that we're going to touch on. But on the other side, Bryce, was doing enough. He had 191 yards, a touchdown, and an interception that proved to be pretty critical. Chuba Hubbard had 92 rushing yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Brooks had 1 carry for -3 yards, and I bring him up just as an unfortunate thing because it was announced today that he did tear his ACL, which is very devastating for the young running back because it is his first year and he was dealing with a severe knee injury like that already. So the fact that he had it again is pretty upsetting. So, that's what happened to Jonathan Brooks. The news came out today. And then in the passing game, it was all about Adam Thielen. 9 receptions for 102 yards. Almost had a play there at the end, but it was broken up by Darius Slay. And, this game was pretty interesting, too, how it unfolded, because the Eagles failed to score on their opening drive. Same old. It's the 13th time that they failed to score on their opening drive this year. And not only that, they didn't score in the first quarter again. So Carolina led 3-0 before, in the second quarter, the Eagles finally put a touchdown on the board, and now it's 3-7. But Carolina answered right away with their own touchdown, so it was 10-7 at this point after Carolina scored. And I mentioned the interception by Bryce Young came at quite possibly one of the worst times because it was around the 2-minute mark where C.J. Gardner-Johnson intercepted a pass from Bryce Young, so they were in positive field position from that point on, and Devontae Smith ended up scoring a touchdown to end the first half with about 14 seconds left. So instead of the Panthers leading, 10-7 or maybe like 13-7, now they're losing 10-14. And after, we get into the second half, Philadelphia actually missed a field goal, and then after that missed field goal, Carolina scored a touchdown, and then the Eagles scored a touchdown yet again. So now we're sitting at 16-21, still in favor of the Eagles. So, 16-22, not 21, 16-22. And now that's the final score of the game. So even though that is the final score of the game, the biggest scare of this game came when the Panthers were trying to mount the comeback, right? They were trying to go and score a touchdown, right, on this drive. And it was a great throw, great concept, great just play overall to get Xavier Legette opened with about like 54 seconds left. And I thought he scored. Actually, in the moment, I was watching and I saw him catch it, I thought, and, kind of just roll into the end zone. So I turned away before I realized that he actually dropped it. He dropped it in a spot where, it couldn't have been drawn up more perfectly. Not even the way he got open, the fact that he was so wide open and still that he dropped the pass was just so deflating. It was so deflating because, for a team like the Panthers to get a win like that, you would need a pass like that to obviously be caught and everything like that. So he dropped it in the end, which led to, I believe, a false start eventually during that drive, and it forced the Panthers on a 4th and 9 play to try and, convert it, obviously. And Bryce Young tried to pass it to Adam Thielen, but Darius Slay made a great play on it, and the Eagles won the game, ultimately 16-22. And we mentioned the passing game and how there was a lot of frustration. Nick Sirianni talked about it. Jalen Hurts was asked about it, and he didn't seem too happy to answer it. But A.J. Brown made a pretty direct comment, pretty honest, and they asked him what about the offense they could do better, and he just right away said passing. Passing is what we could do better. And that, gained some attention about the passing game and whether or not there should be a worry about it. And, I would say no, because, I didn't really hear the quote when it happened right after the game, but then I saw, later on, I kind of gave it a day, and then I saw the quote and everything, and I just find it hard to be worried, like legitimately worried about it. Like I'm worried maybe about the Ravens pass defense or the Bills run defense and things like that, or the Lions injuries. To say I'm worried about the Eagles passing game, I think would be an overestimation of how I really feel, because they're too talented for me to be worried about them, right? With Jalen, AJ, Devontae Smith, there's too much talent there for me to kind of be unsure of what I'm going to get from them, right? I think this was just like your typical trap game where, some teams do lose, and the Eagles could have lost this game, but I thought it was just like an ugly game where maybe you took the Panthers as a non-threat and you kind of were just coasting through this game. So not to say that it excuses them, but I can kind of see why you'd get a performance like this. But I think it will be their biggest challenge, though, to get everybody the ball, right? Usually, it's always good in blowouts, right, where Saquon has like 50-yard runs and like over 130 rushing yards. Jalen Hurts gets into the end zone like twice. A.J. Brown catches a huge pass down the field, and he gets a lot of yards that way. But the close games are where we're going to see, I guess, the character of this team. Are they always going to be upset when they win close games like this? Probably not, but it is interesting to bring up. And I just feel like they made it look worse by the way that they were just kind of like pretty serious about it, especially in the win. That's what was so weird about it, obviously, because you win, you clinch a playoff berth, you're expected to be happy, but AJ and Jalen Hurts were pretty serious about it, and I don't really have a problem with that either, just because, they're not satisfied. They're being honest, and it's kind of funny how when they are honest and things like that, people take it a wrong way, or they're thinking like, oh, how could they say that? But then if they aren't honest, it's still spun in a negative way. So I didn't really have a problem with it. Obviously, they're frustrated. AJ knows he's good enough to be more involved, and there was some instances where he was, open considerably, and, Jalen just didn't get him the ball, which is frustrating, obviously, as a receiver. But I just think they were being honest, and the fact that, they aren't satisfied is a positive thing. So I'm not really worried about their passing game or anything like that. They're going to continue to put out great performances, right? I think this one was just a odd instance where, you get this, trap game essentially. So, it was weird, the vibes in that locker room afterwards, but I'm sure they're just going to get over it. It was just a pretty frustrating day. Again, weird because they won the game. But regardless of that, we're going to get into talking about Monday Night Football, but not before, in relation to Monday Night Football, Jamar Chase, he made some interesting comments about his future in one of the interviews last week leading up into their game tonight. So I wanted to bring it up. I thought it was pretty interesting to kind of talk about it. And so we're going to do that right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, tips, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, here to talk about the but the topic surrounding, I think, Jamar Chase and the Bengals, an interesting case with the wide receiver, star wide receiver, arguably one of the best in the NFL. Definitely top three. But a lot of people forget how, the season started with Jamar not on the greatest terms with the organization, and the way the season has gone obviously has been pretty frustrating for everybody. You've even seen it and heard it from Jamar in some of his post-game comments and, interviews and things like that. Obviously, no one's going to be happy, but it makes it a bit more, I think, touchy when you look at Jamar and the fact that the contract situations and things like that are or have been, a bit icy, a bit just uncomfortable, it seems, with Jamar and the Bengals. So it all leads to the comments, that he made after, one of the practices last week, I want to say, heading into the Monday Night Football game tonight. But, just overall, before I get into his comments, it's obviously, you look at Jamar and how good he's been, but also Joe Burrow and how they've both been having MVP and Triple Crown, worthy seasons. Jamar, along with Joe Burrow, have been the best part, without a doubt, of this Bengals team, and it's not even been close. Those two, the chemistry they have, it's the reason why people still want to watch the Bengals, right? If one of them wasn't on this team, a lot of people would stop watching the Bengals. But the fact that they have been so good keeps drawing people in to watch them, and for good reason, right? Joe Burrow has been first in yards up until this point in the NFL. He's first in passing touchdowns, and he only has 5 interceptions, where Jamar Chase, on the other hand, he leads all wide receivers in yards. He leads them in touchdowns with 13. In second place, only has 9. And he's tied for third in receptions in the NFL as well. Again, a Triple Crown worthy season. But despite that, Cincinnati finds himself with a 4-8 record and likely to miss the playoffs for a second straight year. And Jamar Chase, now getting to his comments, was asked about what is motivating him, right? Through the last 5 games, knowing that they're probably not going to make the playoffs. What is his, reason for still, being motivated and, not being frustrated, knowing that they're most likely going to miss the playoffs? And he said, what's pushing me most this year with the record is just making memories with the guys I have around me. Who knows what will happen in the next year? And that last part is obviously what sounds a bit, what's the word? Cryptic. That last part is what sounds the most cryptic, right? Who knows what will happen next year? People will say, what do you mean what will happen next year? What do you mean by that? What about next year is going to be different, right? You're going to be on the team, so what's the reason for saying something like that, right? And we do admit that he could be referring just to the overall sense of the Bengals, right? That after a year like this, there's going to be changes anyway, so that's what he could have meant by that, more as a team thing. But there always exists the opportunity, or the possibility, I should say, that we can't ignore his future specifically, right? I don't want to suggest in any way that he's going to leave, or I think he's going to leave, or that this is just like the beginning of the end or something like that. But it is a bit interesting to talk about with Jamar because of what we saw in the offseason and the Bengals' not so great record with extending some guys. They did extend Joe, which was awesome. He has a well-deserved contract and everything like that. But, it hasn't always been the easiest thing with the Bengals to talk contracts with some of their best players. And again, I don't think he'll leave or anything like that. I don't think the Bengals would be silly enough to have another Saquon Barkley sort of situation where for some reason they let Jamar walk out the door and test free agency. It should never come to that, ever. And I don't think it will, but we've seen his frustration this year. He started off the year holding out and things like that, and he now has become more expensive, right? Because of all the great things he's doing this year, owner Mike Brown has said that his goal at the beginning of the season was to keep Burrow and Chase, but they have a questionable past with the contracts, like I said, and the idea of revamping this team and that defense especially, you're going to have to go out there and spend. So how that money is allocated is going to be very interesting. Now, because we are talking about the future now with the Bengals, right? We're not talking playoffs, and, we're not putting these conversations off because there's not going to be any playoffs. So what's the point of not talking about it, right? So, because of that, they not only have to do that, get new pieces in there you'd expect after a disappointing year, but also the fact that Jamar, like I said, is going to be more expensive because not only did CeeDee Lamb get that contract and Justin Jefferson was already up there, but Jamar is having a phenomenal year. The kind of season that he had in his rookie year, he's having that once again in this year, and who knows what kind of numbers he's going to finish with, right? So the fact that that number's already set at about, 35 million per year, Jamar's going to at least want that, if not potentially more, depending on how this season ends. So how you allocate that contract and how you allocate the pieces around the Cincinnati Bengals is going to be interesting. And because of all of that, there's a lot of speculation and expectance that T. Higgins is probably playing his last games with Cincinnati because he's also a talented receiver. I don't think, he's up there with Jamar per se. They're both great. T. Higgins is a great, I would say, number one receiver, but I think a lot of people would still take Jamar. But because of the reasons that, T. Higgins is a very good receiver, you have to bring in a lot more people. Jamar's going to cost more money. It's kind of pushing T. Higgins out the door, and that's expected to kind of happen after this year because they franchise tag T. Higgins this year already. So it's not looking very optimistic that they are going to extend him now in a year where they kind of already let an opportunity to extend Jamar Chase go. Now, this year, the full focus seems to be Jamar Chase, and you don't want to add T. Higgins on top of that either. And despite how difficult the decision is going to be to see him leave, you can't have both of them, right? You can't have and give T. Higgins probably $25 million per year or a little bit more. And on top of that, in the same offseason, give Jamar Chase, $35, $37 million per year. It's not going to happen. And the fact that they already franchise tagged T. Higgins, you'd think that he'd be the one to leave, not Jamar, right? I think the way that things went this year with the contract, it would be kind of foolish to see how frustrated he was in the offseason and then push it off yet another year after that. I think would not go well for the Bengals and Jamar Chase. That's just me. In the offseason, he obviously held out, but also there was those ideas, those comments reportedly from Jamar Chase saying that, he felt misled by the Bengals at the start of the year when it came to his contract and how he thought it was going to happen this year, but ultimately it didn't get there. And I don't want to say it was, an ugly, situation with the contract, but it definitely could have gone better. And I also wouldn't call it amicable either, right? I think it was just how contracts go. There is a little bit of tension, you would say, but I don't think it was neither too ugly or too amicable by any means. So that's why we stand in this gray area. And then with Jamar Chase saying what he said, it kind of brings up that conversation again. But all of that to ultimately say, I can't imagine a world where I see Jamar Chase ever having another jersey on. I think that's impossible at this point. Even if they don't bring in more pieces, they're going to have to pay Jamar probably this year, because could you imagine if they don't and he still plays and he plays even better somehow or puts up another crazy year after this year, how much more money he would cost? It's insane. So the Bengals have kind of put themselves in this place where they force themselves now to pay Jamar Chase next year, and the amount of money he gets, that's still, up there for debate, right? How much they're actually going to give him. But I feel like because they put themselves in that corner, I don't know how much leeway you have to bring in, a whole overload of players, right? I feel like in this situation, it's just going to be a lot similar to how it is this year. And not only that, you're going to have a similar situation, but lose T. Higgins after that. And you could say that losing T. Higgins could open up the door a bit more to bringing in more players, which is true, but I think this situation with the Bengals is a little bit weird And in that gray area, like I said, because of the fact that, Jamar and his contract and still needing a lot of pieces, especially on the defensive side, is going to be a puzzle that they're going to have to figure out. But it is funny because we're talking about Cincinnati in this way, and it reminds me a lot of how we talked about Dallas. Not to that extent by any means, but how we're dealing with big contracts for receivers, for quarterbacks, and still having to fill out the rest of the roster or improve it drastically. It leads perfectly into our final segment, which is previewing those two teams exactly and how similar they are a little bit from that conversation we just had to now talking about previewing the game tonight on Monday Night Football. So that'll be our last segment that we'll get to right after this. Welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast here for our last segment as we inch closer to the start of Monday Night Football set to kick off at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to preview the game, obviously, as we always do on Monday. Tonight is the second Monday Night Football game for both the Bengals and the Dallas Cowboys. In this one, both enter with losing records, obviously. The Bengals at 4-8 and the Dallas Cowboys at 5-7. Very similar, not only in record, but we just finished talking about how the contract situation and trying to fill out the rest of this roster for the Cowboys, obviously, this year, and then the Bengals, you presume this upcoming year with trying to improve the defense drastically, and how, they share at least those similarities, right? And how they play each other tonight on Monday Night Football. But obviously, with the records and things like that, it's obviously been a frustrating season for both of them, who, when healthy, would probably both of these teams be right up there in the mix for the playoffs. The Cowboys you'd have to think, be up there with the Commanders at least, and the, probably just the Commanders. The Packers are like 9-3 right now, right? Or like 9-4, so, they're having a very good year, and I don't know if the Cowboys would be quite that, but I would have to imagine they would be trying to get in with the Washington Commanders for that last spot, but very much still in the mix. They're not technically eliminated, but I don't believe they're going to make the playoffs. So for me, they have been eliminated. And the same thing for the patient didn't really meet up to what we got, right? With Joe Burrow being healthy and things like that, he's kind of held up his part of the deal, but the rest of the team has been very disappointing, especially that defense. And it's just been mainly on them. The onus has been on them on where they are this season at 4-8. But both of these teams, they're on their second consecutive three-game losing streak. Just for the Bengals. The Bengals are on their second three-game losing streak and still haven't been a team over 500. 7 of Cincinnati's 8 losses this year have been by one score, including the last 3 games that they've played in. Just kind of giving you guys an idea of what kind of season it's been for the Bengals, right? But the main story of this season and why I truly don't blame, the amount of blame I would give to Joe Burrow would probably be no more than like 15 or 10%, because of this fact here, right? Joe Burrow would obviously be in the MVP conversation. He's one of 5 quarterbacks in NFL history with at least 30 touchdowns and no more than 5 interceptions through 12 games. The worst record for the other quarterbacks that have those same stats through 12 games in NFL history, the worst record that any of those other quarterbacks has had has been 9-3. And Joe Burrow, included in that group of those other guys, has a record of 4-8, which is unbelievably just absurd. It's absurd how, it's just the opposite record. One's 9-3 and the other one's 4-8. And the quarterback can only do so much, obviously, right? And, he has been at fault, with some turnovers and things like that. But when you have such a drastic difference like that, I have to presume and just put a lot more of the blame on everybody else than just one guy, right? So I think that's been the story of the season, just how historically great Joe Burrow's been playing, but still they have a losing record, which is insane. And just focusing more on this matchup between the Cowboys and the Bengals. Prior to tonight, Dallas has beaten Cincinnati 5 times in a row and are 7-1 at home against the Bengals. Cincinnati's most recent victory in Dallas was in 2004. So, just giving you guys a bit of history there for this matchup, because I always think those things are, for how crazy it might sound, are pretty accurate, and they are what they are for a reason, at least in my mind, right? I'm not sure if I'm the only one to put so much stock into it, but, it is what it is for a certain reason, I have to believe. And to focus more on the Bengals here for a second, they're coming off of a loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was 44-38, another game where the Bengals put up 35-plus points, but they lose. And that means they're 1-3 in the division, and they're dealing with some pretty big injuries, right? I waited for the inactives to come out to kind of give you guys the most accurate information about who's playing tonight and who is not playing. And on the inactives tonight for the Cincinnati Bengals, the biggest one is obviously Orlando Brown. He is dealing with a fibula injury that had him out for a couple games before, and he returned against the Steelers, but now he is out again. And also along those lines, Logan Wilson, their starting linebacker, did not play last week, and he was officially placed on the injured reserve, so he's not going to be playing tonight, obviously. And Evan McPherson, their starting kicker, was also placed on the injured reserve because of a groin injury, I want to say. And also, one that's going to fly under the radar is going to be Sheldon Rankins. He's not on the IR or anything like that, but he is inactive tonight. Their defensive tackle, a huge part of their run defense, is not going to be there tonight. So that's obviously 4 starters right there and 4 phases of the game where the Bengals desperately need, help. You're talking about Joe Burrow's blind side with Orlando Brown, the starting linebacker in Logan Wilson. The kicker obviously is huge. And Sheldon Rankins, right? For a defense that already hasn't been great, losing a guy like that in the middle of your defensive line is always going to be a huge, huge problem for the Bengals. So that's something that they're going to face tonight. But it's not to go without saying that the Cowboys are also not facing a good amount of injuries that are pretty significant. Leading up into this game, Trayvon Diggs was questionable to play, but I don't see him on the inactive, so he is set to go tonight, which is huge. If they didn't have him, it was not going to be great for them facing Jamar Chase, but at least they're going to have Trayvon Diggs out there. But on the injury report for them, offensive guard Zach Martin officially announced that he was going to have surgery on his ankle, so he's obviously not going to play, and he's out for the remainder of the year. Also, no Dexter Lawrence. There was an idea he could return for tonight's game, but he is still inactive and still trying to work his way back to eventually play. And their rookie tackle, Tyler Guyton, was dealing with an ankle injury and a shoulder injury, but also I don't see an injury designation on him, so he is probably expected to play tonight, which is at least a positive for them, considering their O-line and trying to protect Cooper Rush and everything. So on that note, on Cooper Rush, back when Dak Prescott, was dealing with that severe ankle injury, Cooper Rush obviously stepped in as a starter, right? And his second career start actually was a victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's kind of funny how they now play each other tonight in Week 14 in 2024, right? How they cross path once again. So that's that. That's a little bit of information, injury news on both teams. But now we can get into the matchups tonight. And there's some pretty big ones, obviously, with the injuries and things like that, right? Playing into this game. It starts with the matchup between Jamar Chase and Trayvon Diggs. There was a possibility that I thought Trayvon wasn't going to play, but Trayvon should be out there, and he's going to have the difficult task of trying to stop Jamar Chase, which is not a one-man job, obviously, but he is going to be seeing him a lot. It's funny because they played in college together, or against each other, I should say. So that you have that LSU, Alabama, kind of rivalry there. And Trayvon Diggs last played Jamar Chase back in 2022, and he held Jamar Chase to 54 yards last time, which obviously I'd assume doesn't sit well with Jamar. So there is that bit of animosity, that bit of extra motivation in a season, right, where you're 4-8 and you're trying to look for that motivation. I think is going to lead to a lot of exciting things tonight. So that's going to be something to watch out for. Joe Burrow is going to be looking for him. So that's going to be something to watch. Then another matchup is going to be Cooper Rush and CeeDee Lamb against Cincinnati's secondary. They just allowed Russell Wilson to throw for 414 yards and 3 touchdowns all over them. So I know it's not Dak Prescott with CeeDee Lamb, but for a defense that's given up those kind of numbers, right, it does give you a bit more optimism, at least to me, about Cooper Rush. So especially at home where, Cooper Rush has played them before, obviously completely different teams, but it shouldn't give you a reason to be like, oh, Cooper Rush, like there's no chance, right? I mean, Russell Wilson, obviously I would take him over Cooper Rush, but those numbers are not very good. It's not like it was like 250 for like 2 touchdowns or something. It was 400 for 3. So you're telling me Cooper can't get like 225 and a touchdown or 2? I think it opens the door for that, especially when you have a guy like CeeDee Lamb. If the Bengals secondary can tighten up, or they're just going to get torched again, will be the question in that matchup. Before we get to our last one, which is arguably the most important one, because I think in this matchup, whichever one wins, you arguably are not really going to get a lot from the other two. And what I mean by that is Micah Parsons going up against a backup left tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals with Orlando Brown not playing. You can guarantee that Micah is not going to move from that matchup against a backup left tackle. We're going to see him there all night. We're going to. Unless they start like triple teaming him and maybe having him move around the defensive line, there's no reason Micah's ever going to leave that matchup with a backup offensive tackle. So we're going to be seeing him a lot going up against that left tackle. And, we talk about Chase and how he could have a big night potentially. It's not going to matter if Micah's getting to Joe in like a second and a half. So that's going to be huge, a huge task for the Bengals to try and block him, how much attention they bring to him, and what could that do to other opportunities for anybody else trying to get to the quarterback, obviously. So those are the 3 matchups, and that leads us ultimately to our prediction. In this Monday Night Football game, 2 teams that share a lot of similarities and have the same record, give or take, a game. I'm going to go with the Bengals. I'm going to go with the Bengals in a relatively high-scoring game. They can put up points with almost anybody. I don't think that's really the problem. It's just about that defense, right? I think Joe in any game, most of the games except maybe one, he scored at least 20 points, and I think that was the Eagles game. Every other game, it's been 20, 28, 30, 39, like almost 40 points. They can put up points, and I'm not really worried about that, especially against a Cowboys defense that doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence either. They're going to put up points, but it's just the other end of the spectrum where their defense, can they give Joe a little bit of something? Can they give him some sort of support where they only limit the Cowboys to field goals, or they, force punts or something like that, start getting to Cooper Rush all of that is going to be huge in this game. So I'm going to go with the Bengals to win. Dallas could try to slow the game down through Rico Dowdle. That's another guy that I failed to mention. He's coming off of his first 100-yard game, so that could be another avenue where you could try to run the ball a lot and keep Joe Burrow and that offense off the field. But then, that defense comes into play again. Can the Bengals defense limit that and, force some 3-and-outs? That's going to be the MO of this game. But ultimately, I think the Bengals are going to win. I like them more as a team, especially at this point in the year, with no Dak Prescott, no DeMarcus Lawrence, no Zach Martin. I like the Bengals and their players more than what the Cowboys are dealing with. So I'm going to go with the Bengals to win tonight. And that is only set to kick off in about 40-ish minutes. So we're going to sign off. That is everything for today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show at the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, obviously on YouTube, where you can catch more of these live shows and more coverage around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. We're going to go watch Monday Night Football, and I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow, like I do every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, to reflect on Monday Night Football and also continue to talk about the rest of Week 14.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.